Welcome back. The United Arab Emirates has become the first country outside China to approve emergency usage of a Chinese COVID-19 vaccine candidate. In a vote of confidence for a state-backed drug maker keeping up with global rivals to stop the spread of the coronavirus. Now, hundreds of thousands of people have already been injected with Sinopharm vaccines outside of clinical trials. In September 21st, a United Nations official said the COVID-19 pandemic has starkly revealed the reality of inequality among and within nations, with the poorest suffering the most. So, will more countries follow suit? And to what extent has the safety been confirmed? Well, joining me to answer these questions and more are Eric Ding, Senior Fellow at Federation of American Scientists, and Professor Wu ZhiWei, Director, Center for Public Health Research at Nanjing University. Great to see you both. So, the President of the UN Economic and Social Council, Munir Akram, made the remarks at a high-level meeting to commemorate the UN's 75th anniversary, saying that the richer countries have mobilized $11 trillion while the developing countries are struggling to find even a small fraction of the resources they need. Professor Wu, let me start with you. What causes the appearance of inequality, and to what extent the inequality has affected the whole world?
Well, actually, the vaccine development actually takes a long time and consumes enormous resources. What actually we need is a global coordination and collaboration, particularly in this period of pandemic. We need to actually push the vaccine development into a faster lane, and also to ramp up the production capacity to make whenever the vaccine is approved, so it would make the vaccine quickly available to general public. So this is the only way that we could stop this pandemic and then reduce the economic loss. Basically, right now we are suffering about nearly 400 billion US dollars each month when the pandemic is it's going on globally. So it's a very critical that the UN take initiative and then drive the vaccine development.
And about the Chinese vaccine, the Chinese president made a promise at the 73rd World Health Assembly in May 2020 regarding the distribution of that vaccine, saying that COVID-19 vaccine development and deployment in China, when available, will be made a global public good. And this will be China's contribution to ensuring vaccine accessibility and affordability in developing nations. Professor Wu, give us a sense of what does this promise mean for China and the world?
Well, actually, this is very important because the virus has no border, and the pandemic actually is basically affecting every country in this world. The only way to control the pandemic and to reduce the infection rates is make the vaccine universally available to people, to various different countries, and make you have to provide equal access of the vaccine to country, regardless whether they are able to pay or not. So this is one of China's action and promise that to the world, that once we have a vaccine, we will make it available to the world. I mean, one of the issues is that the UN has now spearheaded a program called COVAX, which actually has three aspects in this vaccine development. One is that the UN is going to raise a fund to drive the vaccine development and make sure that you can find an effective vaccine. The second is that the UN is going to put money into building up the production capacity, and also finally make the vaccine available to needy countries and the people.
Now, the UAE became the first country outside of China to approve emergency usage of a Chinese vaccine, and Sinopharm vaccine will be given to the UAE's high-risk frontliner workers. Professor Wu, why the UAE and how frontliner workers will be benefited from it?
Well, actually, it's a very important. First, the Sinopharm's vaccine has going through an extensive and stringent clinical testing in phase 1, phase 2, and now in phase 3. The phase 1 and the phase 2 clinical trials showed that this vaccine is safe and effective, could induce needed or expected antibodies. In the phase 3, actually, since the later June, China, Sinopharm, and UAE signed an agreement to go into the phase 3 trial. More than 30,000 people has been participating in this clinical trial, and so far, I mean, the outcome is pretty good. It seems to be very promising that the side effect is minor. So this is important that that's why the UAE agreed to approve the vaccine for the front line individuals who are actually at a higher risk of contracting coronavirus. I think this is one of the emergency use of the vaccine, which has been proving safe and inducing needed immune response.
And Dr. Ding, you're back with us. Let me bring you into this. Now, the UAE, we've been talking about it. It has been working closely with China since the very beginning of COVID-19 studies around diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines. And now, apart from cooperation regarding vaccine development, the UAE has also increased its cooperation with China in recent years in areas such as technology and health. But some countries have the geopolitical incentive concern on China here, saying it is the vaccine diplomacy. How are you looking at this? How are you understanding the situation here?
Well, actually,
I think vaccine diplomacy, you have to be careful because obviously UAE does not have as much vaccine production and research as China. So China offers that. But at the same time, testing frontline workers in UAE without full clinical phase 3 trial completion, because the vaccine that was offered has not completed phase 3 trials. I'm still a little worried because will that set up a dynamic in which you're testing countries in which people on these vaccines which have not been fully tested in the phase 3 trial and using them as guinea pigs? I just feel like because of this imbalance, it creates this demand and creates this potential leverage that I feel is unfair. And this is, again, using and approving a vaccine that has not gone through full phase 3 clinical trial and published data is a little bit worrisome in terms of, are we, abusing or misusing third world nations, developing countries? And that's what I'm very concerned about.
Now, Dr. Ding, we want to also get your take on this so-called global race for vaccines. President Donald Trump is pressing U.S. pharmaceutical companies for a faster release of an American vaccine. How can we understand Trump's push or rush for an American vaccine, especially after side effects from the AstraZeneca vaccine came to light?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And this also applies for any vaccine that comes from China or Russia, because no one has completed phase 3 trials yet. And whether it's China or Donald Trump or any country, they should not be rushing a vaccine, because actually it's one of those, you could win the battle but lose the war. Because if for some reason you rush out the deployment of the vaccine and later on in phase 3 they discover there's more adverse effects, then that's going to put a total dampener on people willingness to take the vaccine once the big rollout in 2021 comes out. And this is where I'm saying we must be very careful. Governments should not rush, and it should not be like a rivalry, as you were saying. It's not a war. It is, in essence, we're a war against the virus, but not between each countries, and we shouldn't be competing against each other.
Yeah, it's not a war. China is now the sole supplier, though, of COVID-19 vaccine to the Middle East, while the U.S. feels enormous geopolitical pressure because China and Russia are the front runners in vaccine development. Professor Wu, is there any possibility, though, that the U.S. and China can cooperate on whatever the vaccines or other aspects of fighting against the pandemic?
Well, actually, I think China and the U.S. definitely should collaborate and in vaccine development. Actually, China has been actually doing pretty good in vaccine development and acted very quickly. And right now, China has about 4 vaccines on the various different phases of clinical trials, and the U.S. has tremendous experience and technology in vaccine development. But unfortunately, that the vaccine vaccine now, I mean, basically becoming a geopolitical tool by the Trump administration, and also, vaccine nationalism has become also a tool to vote the domestic audience. I think this is unfortunate events, and basically we really should look at the collaborative and cooperative way to push the vaccine development, and basically that's actually would be good, for the global community.
And Professor Wu earlier talked about COVAX initiative. So Dr. Ding, I want to also get your take on this. The WHO-led COVAX initiative for the coordination and distribution of vaccines now has been snubbed by the United States. And what does China's push for vaccines mean for the whole world and in the face of the pandemic?
Well actually,
yeah,
China's...
Dr. Ding.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I think the COVAX thing, I think it's another vaccine collaboration that the U.S. should have joined. And many in the U.S. criticized Donald Trump for refusing to join, because I think right now in the middle of a pandemic, it's like an insurance policy. If for some reason the warp speed vaccines fail, that there is a global collaboration that you can also dip and join, and so that we can actually find the most optimal vaccine with the highest efficacy and best safety profile. And right now, putting all our eggs in one basket with just the warp speed is a very limited approach. I think we need global cooperation, but again, we don't want rivalries. We don't want this China first, Russia first. It's not about being first. This is not in that kind of race. We want to make sure we have the best vaccine, not the first vaccine.
Yeah, it's not a competition. Thank you very much. Let's leave it there. Many thanks to Dr. Eric Ding, Senior Fellow, Federation of American Scientists, and Professor Wu ZHIWEI, the Director of Center for Public Health Research at Nanjing University. And that's going to do it for this edition of The Point.